I see our next speaker waiting for us backstage. We're going to spend a little time with Moreangels Mbizah. She is the founder of Wildlife Conservation Action, an organization dedicated to conserving biodiversity, promoting human-wildlife coexistence, and empowering local communities. So besides identifying and addressing the threats to lions and other large carnivores and their habitat in Zimbabwe, Moreangels also works to promote coexistence between wildlife and the communities that reside alongside these wildlife habitats. So Moreangels, if you're there, let's get that camera turned on. I'm going to pop you into the call. We're really excited to have you joining us live from Zimbabwe today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, yeah, it is great to have you joining us. It looks like you've got a sunny day there, which is always exciting and a good way to start the day. Yeah, thanks for joining us. How's your weekend going?
It's been great so far. Yeah, so it's around 7 o'clock in the morning in Zimbabwe. So, yeah, it's early.
We appreciate it even more that you got up nice and early for us to spend a little time with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit because we'd really love to learn a little bit more of your story, the work you do with carnivores, and of course, you know, bringing the community in and making sure that they're coexisting happily next to these beautiful, beautiful animals.
Thank you. So I will share my screen.
Okay, I see it loading up. Looking promising so far. And if we go full screen, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. So my name is
Moreangels, let me just stop you really quickly. It didn't go full screen for us, so let's try sharing in a different way. Okay. If you stop the screen share, and this time when you click share screen, pick that first option to do your entire screen. It makes it just a little bit easier to go full screen.
Okay, so share screen. So
should be an option that asks for entire screen.
Okay.
We definitely want to see the pictures nice and full screen. All right, fingers crossed. That's what I'm talking about. All right, we're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, my name is Moreangels Mbizah, and I'm the executive director and also the founder of Wildlife Conservation Action. And today I'm going to talk about community-based and local-led conservation and how that is important for biodiversity conservation. So I'm going to talk about my journey in conservation and also about the work that my organization is doing in Zimbabwe, and also about how we are working with our local communities. So just to give you a brief background, I grew up in a small town in Zimbabwe called Chiredzi. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be a psychologist because I wanted to help people, especially children. And yeah, that was my dream, but little did I know that the university had other plans for me. So I had a few lectures on wildlife ecology during my master's program, and that sparked an interest in me to learn more about wildlife. And I wanted to get involved in that, and I wanted to explore that avenue, and that interest really changed my life forever. And so you can say that my story in conservation doesn't start like that of many other conservationists, especially like from the global north. So although I lived about 60 kilometers from from the second largest national park in Zimbabwe, I never had a chance to visit the national park, which is Gonarejo National Park. This was because my parents, my middle class parents, they worked very hard to provide for me and my siblings, but they just could not afford any other luxuries. And going to a national park to visit was a luxury for us. So we could not afford to do that. And so I grew up without knowing about wildlife or wildlife conservation. And also we did not have a digital satellite television at home. So I only watched our local broadcaster, and the content was very limited. So growing up, I did not know anything about wildlife, or I did not even watch any of the National Geographic programs. So I didn't even know that wildlife conservation was a career when I was growing up. And so when my journey started and I arrived in South Valley Conservancy for my master's project, I immediately fell in love with nature, because that was my first time being in nature, being in the wild. And I instantly knew at that moment that protecting wildlife was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I felt that I had found my passion and my purpose in life. But I was not aware of what I was getting myself into. But it wasn't long before I became aware that there were not many people that looked like me that were practicing conservation. So there were very few people that I could look at and see that they look like me. And then I then realized that although white people were less than 1% of the population in Zimbabwe, conservation was the only field that was predominantly white. And at that point in time, I could not understand why that was the case, but it became my mission to understand that and do the best that I could to have more Black Zimbabweans into conservation as a field. So I went to Oxford and did my PhD on lions. And when I came back from Oxford in 2018, I came back home to Zimbabwe. And although most of my work until that point had been focused on ecology and behavior of wildlife and studying and trying to understand that, I realized that although it was important for us to understand ecology and behavior, the key for biodiversity conservation was local-led and community-based conservation. So that was the key to conserving our biodiversity. So upon my return to Zimbabwe, I formed a conservation organization called Wildlife Conservation Action. So the aim was to build the capacity of local communities to protect and coexist with wildlife, and also to benefit from doing so. So the reason that I formed Wildlife Conservation Action was to provide a platform for local conservationists in Zimbabwe and our local communities to take a lead in conservation efforts, because sometimes these groups of people are left behind when conservation happens. And I realized that also that there were very few local-led and community-based conservation organizations in Zimbabwe. So I wanted to change that and have a local-led conservation, have local communities actively involved in conservation. So we know that conservation works best when local communities are actively participating in the conservation work, and that the support of local communities is very essential to the success of our conservation efforts. But the question is, how exactly can this involvement be achieved? Like, how do we get local communities to participate in conservation? So these are some of the things that I will touch on during this presentation, and also talk a little bit about the work that we are doing in Zimbabwe around this. So maybe to just go back a little and see how we got to where we are today. So the establishment of protected areas meant that some communities needed to be moved out of these areas. In other words, they were displaced from their ancestral lands. So this happened across the world. For example, 26 different Native American groups were banned from their hunting grounds when the world's first national park, the Yellowstone National Park, was formed in 1872. So this happened across the world. And most recently, the establishment of Uganda's Gwindi Impenetrable National Park in 1991 also saw the Bwata hunter-gatherers being forcibly removed out of their rainforest, which is their ancestral land, to make space for endangered mountain gorillas. So there are, of course, some communities, for example, in Zimbabwe, that settled themselves in wildlife areas during the fast-track land reform program in 2000. And many families moved into these areas in search of agricultural land. So across the world, there are communities living inside protected areas and some living along the borders of protected areas. So this is the situation we have now, that we have people that are living alongside wildlife. And so when people live alongside wildlife, these people often are in rural areas. They often grow crops and keep livestock as a source of livelihood. And sometimes it's their only source of livelihood. And as much as these communities value wildlife and want to protect wildlife, they also want to survive. And when these communities, because they are living alongside wildlife, they often suffer the costs of doing so. They bear the cost of living with wildlife, and most often with little to no benefit. So they get attacked by predators. Their livestock gets killed by predators, and their crops are destroyed by large herbivores like elephants, buffaloes, and hippos. And this has a great impact on their food security and their livelihoods. And in most of these areas where human-wildlife conflict occurs, there is no compensation for the cost or the damages caused by wildlife. So this often results in resentment towards wildlife. So the community starts to resent wildlife, and they start to kill wildlife in retaliation through poisoning or snaring or other means. And so we need to realize that human-wildlife conflict is one of Africa's biggest conservation issues, and we need to address that urgently. So if we are not careful about how we approach local communities or how we interact with communities, it can also lead to resistance. So we need to involve the communities in every stage of each conservation project, from planning to implementation. So the community has to be part of all those processes, all those stages. And it is also important that we train the community, we give them the skills that they need to be able to fully participate and be involved in these processes. And they should be able to make decisions, and we need to hear their voice as well. Because if communities feel left out or feel that an outsider is coming to tell them what to do, they might end up resisting. And some of these signs of resistance would include poaching. They will start to poach wildlife. They will start to vandalize some properties, or just influence other people to not cooperate or to not get involved in the conservation efforts. So these are some of the things that we often face when we don't involve the communities from the beginning, or when we don't hear their voices or consider them in the activities that we do in these areas. But if we get it right, if the local communities get involved from the beginning, they can play an important role. For example, with the anti-poaching efforts and the fight against wildlife crimes, communities can act as the first line of defense because they know the area well and they know the people well. The local communities can be involved in anti-poaching as scouts or as informers, and they can also be involved directly in conservation as community guardians, or what some people call the land guardians. So these are basically community members that are working to protect wildlife and protect the communities from the negative effects of wildlife on their livelihoods. So these are recruited from the communities, and they are part of the community. They live with the communities, and they help to bridge that gap between a project and the community. The local people can also be employed as tour guides. They can be employed as rangers in these protected areas, and they can then be actively involved in the protection of wildlife and other natural resources. So we have talked about the cost that these communities face from living with wildlife, but because of these costs, we need to reduce these costs and increase the benefits. Because we have said that the cost can lead to retaliation by the communities or resistance to conservation initiatives. So it is important that we also focus on reducing these costs that the communities face from living with wildlife. So this can be done by implementing the various conflict mitigation measures that are out there. But I should emphasize that it is important that the decisions about which mitigation measures to implement should be done through community consultations, so that you have the community buy-in, so that the communities make that decision of what they want to see implemented. So some of the measures that we have been implementing include the mobile predator-proof livestock bombers, which protect the livestock from predation by lions and hyenas and other large carnivores. And because the carnivores cannot see inside these bombers, they would not attack the crops. And the advantage of these bombers also is that they fertilize the fields of these farmers, where when they put them in their fields, and they can move them because they are mobile, they can move them from one place to another and fertilize their fields. And this would result in increased yields. So in that way, we reduce the cost that they face from predation by lions, and we also give a benefit of increased yields from the fertilization of their farms, from the manure left behind by the livestock. And some of the methods also to mitigate against crop raids by elephant is the use of beehive fences, and chili fences have also been used to deter the crop raiders, especially the elephants. So we also need to increase other benefits that the communities can get from living with wildlife. And when the community starts to see these benefits that wildlife brings, whether they are direct benefits or indirect benefits, their attitudes towards wildlife, their perception starts to change, and they start to care more for wildlife and want wildlife in their area. So a good example is the increase in mountain gorilla population in Rwanda. So this happened because gorillas became such an important resource for the local communities, as they were getting income from their protection. And as a result, these local communities became committed to protecting the mountain gorillas. So some of the local communities in some countries, they also benefit through programs such as the Community-Based Natural Resource Management Program, the CBNRM, and in Zimbabwe it's called the Campfire. So communities that are living with around wildlife areas benefit from these campfire programs. But because of various factors, including bad governance, the benefits are now becoming very, very, very little than they used to be before that. So as I said, some of these mitigation measures, they don't only protect against the loss of livelihoods, but they also result in the gaining of income by the communities. For example, the use of chili fences, the communities can then sell the excess chili and get an income from that chili. So that would be an advantage of using such mitigation measures. And the communities can also be involved in other income generation projects, which like tourism, so they can make the arts and crafts and sell these to tourists to earn an extra income. So these will also be direct benefits that the communities can get from living alongside wildlife. But it is important that these communities also diversify their income. And we have seen with the COVID-19 pandemic that it is very important for this community to diversify so that they don't just rely on the tourism industry, because it has impacted the local communities living alongside these protected areas because of the reduced number of tourists coming to these areas. So there's a need for us to help these communities to diversify their income. So just going a bit on the side, we see that there are many people dream of coming to Africa to save wildlife, but what will save wildlife is investing in the conservation and leadership training of the next generation of African conservation leaders. So that is what will save wildlife in Africa. So we will need the local conservationists to have influential leadership and decision-making roles in conservation, and not just delegated to worker roles where they have no influence on critical decisions. So when positions arise in conservation organizations working in Africa, for example, the priority has to be given to some of these Black African conservationists, that is, they meet requirements. Because currently, if we look at some of the top leadership and management positions within some conservation organizations working in Africa, we can see that it's mainly composed of white people, and there are very few Black people in there. But when we look, when we look at the wider area, then we can see that there are some capable Black people, Black Africans, that can take up those leadership positions. So I think it is important that we start to see that shift, so that we have these local conservationists starting to lead the conservation efforts in their countries, and take charge in taking the responsibility of protecting their natural resources and their wildlife. There's also a need to increase the funding opportunities available to Black conservationists and organizations led by Black Africans. And there's need for support, there's need for trust, because what we see now is there is lots of stereotypes when it comes to funding and support for local conservationists. So we really need to think hard and come up with sustainable and innovative ways to involve local communities, to involve local conservationists in conservation, because these groups are very fundamental to conservation efforts. And without their involvement, conservation will not succeed. And I also want to emphasize that it's not just about having these local people or these local conservationists in conservation, but it is very much about them leading and making decisions about their natural resources and their environment. So it's important that they take these decision-making roles when it comes to conservation and implementation of conservation initiatives. So our organization, which is Wildlife Conservation Action, we are committed to inspiring and empowering and building the capacity of our local communities, as well as the next generation of African conservation leaders, so that they are able to protect biodiversity and to also benefit from their natural resources, because at the end of the day, they should also benefit from the resources that they are protecting. Thank you.
All right, Moreangels, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And thank you so much for just really highlighting the importance of bringing the community in, letting everybody feel like they have a say and a stake in it. And then also, nobody wants to destroy the nature in their own backyard, right? A lot of times it's circumstance or protecting, your livelihood or food. But if the communities alongside the park are happy, if they have jobs, then they're proud of their wildlife and they do want to protect it.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, what I love about your story is, when you started out, you didn't see a lot of people like you in conservation, but you've become this role model. And if there's anything I've learned from hosting scientists, explorers, conservationists from all over the world, is that they share a common story. Meeting somebody, reading a book, seeing a documentary, and it flipped a switch for them. It ignited a passion. So I have no doubt that you're a role model who's really just inspiring the next generation of conservationists in Zimbabwe. So a huge shout out and a thank you to the work that you're doing.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, I'm curious. We saw that picture of a meeting with the community, everybody kind of getting together and talking about a new conservation project, and everybody having a chance to hear about it and having a chance to contribute, right? Because nobody likes to be told what to do. Nobody likes someone to say they know better. So, who knows better than the community right there? So I'm curious what it's like at one of those meetings. What's it like to be there? How is it? Does it get loud sometimes? Are people excited to share? What's it like in one of those meetings?
Yeah, so in that particular meeting, it was intense, it was heated, because that community has been experiencing conflict with lions for a very long time. So they have their livestock killed by lions, and I think just 2 years ago, somebody was killed by a lion while they were on a motorbike going about their business. So it was very, very heated to be in that meeting, because people were angry. But the positive thing is, these communities, they want wildlife. They know the importance of wildlife and they value wildlife, because it's not just the benefits that they get from wildlife, but also our culture, like our Zimbabwean culture. Wildlife is important, and we also have totems that are from wildlife. So for them, it's important to protect wildlife. But when they start to have these incidences where wildlife becomes a threat to their livelihoods and their lives, then they are not happy, and they are not even afraid to speak that out. So yeah, but the positive thing to come out of that meeting is, at the end, everyone agreed that the project was needed in the place, and they were ready to get involved and to work together with our organization, so that we can reduce those incidences of conflict with lions.
Yeah, and that's exactly what should come out of meetings like that. Had someone just said to the community, this is the way it's going to be, well, that wouldn't have, I don't think that would have been a good thing. It wouldn't have flown. But giving everybody a voice, letting everybody take part, a lot of times it's just people want to have their concerns heard and a chance to speak up. So, it's really impressive what you're doing. Big congratulations for wildlife conservation action, and you're really coming at it from just a great every angle, from supporting the community, inspiring the next generation of conservationists in the country, providing jobs, giving people a chance to protect their livelihoods and livestock and crops. So again, just a huge congratulations for what you're doing. It really was a pleasure to hear your story and have you share it with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for getting up nice and early for us. And hopefully you can tune in a little bit more over the weekend.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Moreangels.